This week's case is about a family that was brutally murdered by a man obsessed with leaves. So, let's get started. Hello everyone, my name is Brandy and it's time for a true crime case, mystery, or another type of story with one or more of my fabulous felines. If you are a returning subscriber, welcome back, my feline friends, and a big shout out to my feline fans who help support this channel. I think you guys know by now that I try to get videos out like every other Friday, but busyness, everything. So let's just say that my videos will come out every other weekend. So they'll be out by Sunday. We're dealing with some illness in the household right now, so that's kind of taking up some time. Anyway, let's get started on this case. Matthew J. Hoffman was born November 1st, 1980, to Robert and Patricia in Warren, Ohio. Now, not much is known about Matthew's childhood. I think he had a pretty normal childhood as far as we know. Now, people would explain him as a quiet kid, kind of kept to himself, but he would act strange at times. But he wasn't believed to be dangerous. The weirdest thing about Matthew was that he was obsessed with trees, and in particular, leaves. In 2001, when Matthew was 21 years old, he was arrested in Colorado for arson and burglary after he set a condominium on fire. See, Matthew had gotten a job in Colorado as a plumber's assistant. He didn't have a place to stay, and so he was actually squatting in one of his clients' condos, like their vacation condos, so they weren't there all the time. So Matthew got word or found out that the client was actually planning to use the vacation condo. So instead of just cleaning up and leaving, he just set the place on fire to hide the fact that he'd been living there. Well, he got caught. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. He did only serve 6 years in prison for good behavior and got out early. So in 2009, after Matthew got out of prison, he moved back to his home state of Ohio, where he did buy a home. He started seeing a woman who had a young son from a previous relationship, and they ended up moving in together. Everything seemed fine until about the end of 2010. Matthew's neighbors stated that he got really weird all of a sudden. Like, he used to play with the neighborhood kids. He would be out playing with, his girlfriend's young son, but that all changed. He started becoming irritable and paranoid, so much so that his girlfriend had enough and ended up leaving him and moving out of the house. He lost his job as a tree trimmer. Ironic, but yes, he was a part-time tree trimmer at the time. He lost his job because of poor job performance, because he had a problem with cutting limbs off of trees. And he lied about the felony he had in Colorado of burning that house down, and they found out. So he was fired. After he lost his job, neighbors said that he disconnected the power to his house, one less bill to pay apparently. And then he built a perch in one of his trees on his property. And he would spend hours up in this tree just watching the neighborhood. Neighbors would start telling their children to not play outside when Matthew was up in his perch because it made them feel very uncomfortable. If that wasn't enough, Matthew started trapping and killing squirrels, and then he would grill them up and eat them. One neighbor stated that she thinks he did that because he didn't have any money to go to the store. Now, a couple weeks after Matthew and his girlfriend broke up, Matthew's ex-girlfriend had returned to the residence to, pick up the last of her things, and the two got into an heated argument. Matthew ended up choking his ex-girlfriend, and she would press charges, but then she dropped the charges a couple days later. Wish she wouldn't have done that. So it's now November of 2010, and Matthew, being his weird, strange self, decided that he was going to plan a robbery, to get some extra money. So he stalked out a couple places and decided on the Hermann house in Apple Valley, Ohio. Now, the Hermann family consisted of Tina, who was 32. She was the mother. Greg, Tina's boyfriend, and Tina's 2 children from her previous marriage, Cody, who was 11, and Sarah, who was 13 years old. Matthew said he chose this house because he noticed when he was stalking out places that the garage didn't close properly, so it would be easy to break into. And the house was pretty fairly isolated. There were neighbors around, but they weren't too close to know if something was wrong. So the night of November 9th, 2010, Matthew parked his car a mile away from the Hermann house and then walked through the woods. Matthew set up like a small camp and camped out in this wooded area, which was kind of right across from the Hermann house, so he could just watch them. And he spent the night there. Now, Greg, the boyfriend that lived in this house, worked nights because he worked at a distribution center, so he had left for work around 3 a.m. that morning. Fortunately for Matthew, Greg was actually going on a golfing trip with his buddies after he had gotten off work, so he wouldn't be home for a couple days. It was kind of a shame because if Greg would have come home, maybe this would have ended differently. Now, Matthew watched that whole morning as the 2 kids went off to school, and then Tina finally left the house around 9 a.m.-ish, which Matthew assumed she was going to work. So Matthew gathered his things and he broke into the house through the garage, and he spent the next couple hours going through the home and, putting belongings in a sack and whatever, which is sort of weird. Usually burglars are in and out. Matthew was taking his sweet time. However, Matthew then heard a car pull up outside. See, Matthew thought Tina, when she left the house, that she had left for work, but Tina actually worked at the local Dairy Queen and usually worked, like at night or in the afternoon. So Tina actually had the day off that day, and she decided to go with her friend Stephanie, and they were going to go shopping that morning. And so, since Matthew was hanging around the house for a couple hours, he was trapped in the house when they pulled in the driveway. So Matthew went back and hid in one of the back bedrooms, which happened to be Tina's bedroom. Tina walked into the house first and went directly to her bedroom to put down, the various shopping items that she bought. Matthew initially stated that his plan was to knock her out and then he would just leave the premises. However, he was really bad at it and couldn't get her knocked out. He had a hunting knife on him and he was using the, handle part to try to knock her out, and it just wasn't working. So he ended up panicking because she started yelling, and he ended up stabbing her in the back instead. Now, Stephanie was still outside unloading, shopping stuff, and then Stephanie finally came inside. Of course, Stephanie was unaware that anything had just happened to Tina. Matthew had kind of jumped out at her, and Stephanie started to run. Matthew said that he chased Stephanie down and ended up stabbing her in the chest several times. Now, the family had a dog, and Matthew really doesn't say, if the dog was quiet while he was there robbing or whatever, but due to the commotion of, attacking Tina and Stephanie, the dog started barking wildly and wouldn't stop barking. So he ended up killing the dog. In the aftermath, Matthew realized kind of what he had done, and he said he panicked. So instead of just fleeing the scene, he then dragged the 2 bodies and the dog into the bathroom, and he started dismembering each body. He put their body parts in a trash bag, and he loaded the bags into the back of Stephanie's Jeep that was parked outside. He then went back inside and he attempted to clean up the scene. Now, doing this, dismembering all this stuff, it takes time, and because he already hung around the house burglarizing it, he realized that it was kind of late in the day, and he heard the kids coming home from school, Cody and Sarah. So Matthew again hid in the house and waited for them to come inside. They both walked through the door pretty much at the same time. Matthew attacked Cody first. Cody tried to run back out the door, but Matthew stabbed him in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Sarah had run down the hall into her room and tried to close the door to keep Matthew out, but Matthew was able to break through the door. Now, instead of killing Sarah, he found an electrical cord in her room, and he ended up tying her up with that electrical cord and then putting a pillowcase over her head. He then picked her up and carried her to the kitchen and put her on the kitchen floor. Sarah then listened to Matthew dismember Cody's body and put it in trash bags for the next hour. After that, Matthew then picked up Sarah and took her outside and put her into the back of Stephanie's Jeep along with the trash bags of the dismembered body parts. Matthew had then drove Stephanie's Jeep a mile down the road where his car was at. He transferred the tied up and bound Sarah into his own car, and then he drove back to his house. He locked up Sarah in his bathroom to make sure she couldn't escape and gagged her. Matthew then returned to where Stephanie's Jeep was parked, and he was gone for a while hiding the trash bags full of body parts. Matthew would then return to his home, and then he took a nap. I guess he'd be exhausted from all that. Now, he didn't want Sarah to escape while he was sleeping, so he got her out of the bathroom and he actually tied Sarah to himself so he would wake up if she tried to escape. Now, while Sarah was lying next to the sleeping Matthew, she just kind of looked around at Matthew's house, and what she saw was very strange. Matthew's house was filled with leaves. His walls were lined with bags of leaves. His floor was covered with loose piles of leaves. And we're not talking just, there was a few leaves on the floor. We're talking piles, mounds of leaves that he had brought in from the outside. They were just everywhere. Eventually, after Matthew woke up from his nap, he decided to put Sarah in his basement, which wasn't like a full basement. It was kind of a little basement crawl space, like storage space. And he had put blankets and piles of leaves down there for her, and then he would chain her up and gag her. Now, Matthew had a plan that he was going to return to the Hermann's house, and he was actually going to set it on fire because he had no way to clean up the scene since it was so bloody. So Matthew drove Stephanie's Jeep back to the Hermann's house and parked it into the garage. So he grabbed the keys to Tina's truck because he was going to transport gas cans from his house, fill them up at a gas station, and then bring them back to the house and, set the place on fire. But the problem is that he was able to go to his house, get the gas cans, but on his way back, the truck had transmission issues and actually broke down. So he had no choice but to abandon the truck in a college parking lot. Matthew then had to walk home, and once he got home, he started sexually assaulting Sarah. When he wasn't sexually assaulting her, he'd return her chained up and bound and gagged into that basement crawl space that was filled with leaves. It was cold, dark, and wet. Now, Matthew only would feed Sarah rotten food, and because she wasn't allowed to use the bathroom, he taped a trash bag to her, like a makeshift diaper, and he wouldn't allow her to clean herself. So yeah, again, what a peach. Now, the next morning after the murders, both Stephanie and Tina's jobs were concerned that they didn't show up. And the children, of course, were reported for not being in school. So Tina's boss actually went to Tina's house. She noticed Tina's truck was gone, and she looked through the windows, and things just didn't look right in the house. She ended up breaking a window in the back and going through the back door, and when she walked inside, that's when she saw blood everywhere. So she immediately called the police. Now, when police got there, they started their investigation and started going through the house, and they just found blood in almost every room. They noticed that there was also some blood drag marks going to the bathroom, which was the worst room in the house. They said that pretty much the bathroom was completely red. It was on every surface, almost every wall. And the bathtub actually had a ring around it where they said that blood was probably 2 inches in there before being drained. Police did look at Stephanie's Jeep in the garage and thought it was weird because not only was there lots of blood in the back of it, there was like certain types of weeds and stuff stuck to the grill. So they figured that whoever did this, for whatever reason, returned the car to the house, which we all know that Matthew was going to burn it down, but his plan failed on that. Police also saw that there were smaller shoe prints, because when Matthew took Sarah out to the garage, he made her walk, and she had to walk through blood. So there was these smaller blood footprints in the garage. They matched a certain type of boot, which they found that boot box in Sarah's room. So they did have hope that Sarah was still alive. What helped break the case was that the police, looking around the garage, actually found a Walmart sack, an empty Walmart sack, and inside was a receipt. And the receipt was for things purchased that morning. It included the tarps and the black trash bags. So investigators went to that Walmart and requested video footage. And when they watched the footage for that time of day and purchases, they saw a man, which they really couldn't recognize because, sometimes the video footage isn't great. But all they knew is that he was wearing a camouflage shirt, and when they followed him to the parking lot, he was driving a Toyota. Police began searching for Tina's missing pickup as well, and they did finally find it in the parking lot of that college. And they found empty gas cans in the back. Now, this is a college parking lot, so, there are people kind of mulling around. Police noticed a man was sitting in a Toyota car right next to Tina's truck. When they talked to the man actually said that he was waiting for his girlfriend. He didn't seem to have anything to do with anything, and they let him go. Now, the man they talked to was actually Matthew, as you probably would have guessed, and he had returned to Tina's truck to actually get his gas cans. But he then was confronted by police, got spooked, and just left the area. Now, this was before the police were able to watch the Walmart videos, so they didn't know that this was the Toyota and the guy that they're looking for. Now, police would later put this together after watching the video because Matthew was still wearing his camouflage t-shirt, and they knew that that was the guy they were looking for. So they narrowed down the search by looking for everyone that drove that brand of Toyota until they finally found who this man was, Matthew Hoffman. And ironically, this camouflage shirt must be his favorite because he was wearing that shirt in his driver's license photo as well. So kind of hard to, not say this isn't your guy. So because they didn't know how dangerous Matthew was or what weapons he might have, they called in the SWAT team, and the SWAT team paid Matthew a surprise visit. Now, when they broke into his house, there was no real, Matthew didn't fight. He was actually asleep on his couch, so they really did surprise him, and he was taken into custody without incident. So after they took him into custody, they started searching around his house. That's when they found Sarah in the basement crawl space. She was tied up. She was still alive, and they were very happy to find her that way. Now, as police searched the house, they were also baffled by Matthew's decorating choice of leaves everywhere. There was such a large pile of leaves in the living room that the police had two thoughts: that either someone could be hiding in the leaves, or there could be dead bodies under the pile of leaves, which either one would be pretty scary. But luckily, they didn't find either. It was just a pile of leaves that Matthew insisted having in his house. In the kitchen, where there wasn't leaves on the wall, Matthew had drawn on his walls these little doodles. It just looked like toddler doodles, so they weren't sure if they had any significance or not, but weird all the same. Now, Matthew was taken into custody and questioned, and he was pretty quiet at first. He wouldn't really say much. Matthew's attorney stated that the murders were the result of a burglary gone wrong, that, he was robbing the place. They came home, surprised him, so that's why they killed him, because he panicked. But investigators found evidence where Matthew was making purchases for about a week before these murders went down, and the purchases were more towards that he was going to murder, not rob. So that was kind of questionable. And prosecutors stated that, burglars don't hang around a place for hours on end. They get in and they get out. There was a question on whether he was planning on murdering or if it was all just a, burglary gone wrong. It's still up in the air on that, by the way. They never really determined if he meant to do the murders or not. Now, at first, Matthew would not disclose where he hid the remains of the family because the death penalty was on the table. So they made a deal with him that if he told them where the remains of the bodies were, that the death penalty would be taken off the table. So he agreed to that and told them where he hid them. Now, using a pulley system, Matt had hid the trash bags of the body parts in a 60-foot hollow tree in a park. Of course, he hid them in a tree. So he told authorities where the tree was at, and Matthew also made a special request to authorities not to damage the tree, however, because he considered the tree sacred. So in the end, Matthew would plead guilty on January 6, 2011 to the murders of Tina, Cody, and Stephanie, and gross abuse of corpses because he dismembered them. He also would plead guilty to the kidnapping and rape of Sarah. Matthew was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for Sarah, she is a very tough girl. She was instrumental in helping with the investigation, and the police called her the epitome of bravery. Sarah asked to speak at Matthew's sentencing, but it was ultimately decided that she shouldn't. Sarah just wanted to speak at the sentencing to tell Matthew that she was not scared of him, and he did not break her. Now, Sarah would end up moving in with her father and stepmother and would go on to write a book named The Girl in the Leaves. Her father and her would go on Dr. Phil after the book was published to talk about their story. Unfortunately, in 2013, when Sarah was 16 years old, her father and stepmother were charged with beating her. Her father was accused of punching her in the back, and her stepmother was accused of kicking her down a set of stairs. A protective order was put in place, and Sarah was moved in with another relative, and not much has been heard about her since, but she is alive and well. As for the tree that Matthew hid the remains in, the tree was removed because authorities were afraid that tree would become some sort of public attraction that they didn't want. So they did not give Matthew his request, and they removed the tree. So that is the case. Now, Matthew's obsession with leaves is called dendrophilia. It's a respect, love, or sexual attraction to trees and or leaves. The people that have this either spend all their time in the forest and nature in a wooded area, or they do what Matthew did and they bring it all inside to their living environment. Now, not all people that have dendrophilia has a sexual attraction. It can be just a desire to protect and care for trees and nature and all that stuff. So what do you think about this case? Please let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for tuning in. I'm sorry if no cats appeared. I have little Darth Kitty. She's on the very top sleeping there. But anyway, I'll go see you guys next time. Bye.